Hi everyone, it's Lisa Mears here, and today I'm going to be making 4 stenciled cards using the new Pretty Pink Posh stencils that were just released in their Valentine's Day release. I'll also be using some of their other new products, including stamps, dies, and their new hot foil plates to make 4 cards. All supplies that I use in my video today will be linked in the description box of this video and on my blog at lisamearsdesigns.com. So let's get started with this first card. And for my first card, I am using the Layered Chocolates stencil. This is a 3-layer stencil that will allow you to make a background full of chocolates. So you have the shape of the chocolates, and then you have the toppings, and then some more toppings or some sprinkles. So I'm going to use this stencil to make a chocolate background for my card, and I'm going to make a card that looks like a candy box. So I'm going to start out with stencil layer A, and I'm going to go ahead and put that on my white cardstock, hold it down with some magnets, and I'm using the scrapbook.com dark chocolate ink, and I'm going to cover this entire stencil with that dark chocolate ink. So just so you know, the Pretty Pink Posh stencils measure 6 inches by 6 inches square, and I believe I cut my cardstock down to slightly under that, about 5.5 by 5.5 inches. And then I will cut this down even more to fit on an A2 size card. So once I finish adding ink to the first layer, I remove that stencil layer and I add layer B. So layer B has all of the little squiggly lines for some toppings for the chocolate, and I'm going to be using some of my scrapbook.com pops of color, and I'm using the Raspberry Kiss color to add to these toppings. So the pops of color is a liquid embellishment, and it dries with 3D dimension and a glossy finish to your project. I chose to use the pops of color because of its vibrant color, and I knew that it would show up well on top of the dark brown ink that I used for the shapes of the chocolate. So I'm just squeezing the tube, putting it here on my palette knife, and then putting it over each one of those individual swirls on this stencil layer B. I'm making sure to spread the pops of color so it's a nice even layer, and I'm also taking the edge of the palette knife to scrape any of the excess off so that it is an even layer over each one of those chocolates. So once I finish with that entire layer, I will remove it, and I will immediately wash that stencil in some warm water so that the pops of color does not stick to the stencil. Since the pops of color is a liquid embellishment, I did set my background aside to dry fully, and after it's completely dry, I will then add my stencil layer C on top. If you use the stencil layer C while your background is still wet, it will smear the first layer, so be sure that it is completely dry before adding the next stencil. So with this next stencil, I am going to be using the pops of color in the key lime color, and I'm going to do the same thing by using my palette knife, just squeezing a little bit on my palette knife, and then applying it to each one of the sprinkle openings on top of that stencil. So just applying a little bit to the palette knife, spreading it on, using the edge of my palette knife to give me a even layer of the pops of color. And then once I've applied it to the entire stencil, I will remove that stencil and make sure to let it dry completely before doing anything else with this background. So once I remove it, I'm just going to bring this up closer to the camera so you can see that beautiful vibrant color, and you can also see the glossy finish of the pops of color. Next, I'm going to use the Pretty Pink Posh Wonky Stitched Rectangle dies. I'm going to take the largest die and the second largest die, and I'm going to layer those together with a piece of mint tape, and then I'm going to die cut a piece of solid pink cardstock. And when that comes out of the die cut machine, I get 2 pieces. I get the frame and the inside piece, which I'm only going to use the frame for my card. Next, I'm going to take the largest Wonky stitched rectangle piece, the same piece that's the size of that frame, and I'm going to die cut this chocolate background. Again, make sure it's completely dry before you run that through the die cut machine. I want this to look like a box of chocolates, so I'm going to take the pink frame and add glue to the back and then add it to the chocolate background. And it will fit perfectly on that background because remember, it was cut with the same stitched die. I will set this piece aside and I'm going to work on my sentiment. So Pretty Pink Posh has two brand new hot foil plates in this release. And the first one is this Love hot foil plate. This is called the Hot Foil Large Love. They also have another one called Hot Foil Large Hugs, and it is the word hugs as a hot foil plate. I went ahead and put the Love hot foil plate on my Spellbinders Glimmer hot foil system, and I placed it on the platform with the flat side touching the platform. And I did this only after the platform was heated up. And then once it was heated up, after placing the hot foil plate on the platform, I pressed the timer button, and when you are ready to foil, the timer light indicator will turn solid green. So then I'll go ahead and add the foil face down, followed by a piece of smooth white cardstock. And then I will add the shim and the spacer pad on top of the platform. And then I'll go ahead and remove the platform from the docking system, and I will place it in my die cutting machine, run it through one time, and then I'll go ahead and remove the foil from the cardstock, and you can see the beautiful results. I just love the way that that turned out. And then I'm going to take the Large Love shadow, and I'm going to die cut the word love out of the cardstock. Now what's neat about the shadow die is that it came with the other love die, so if you don't have a hot foil machine, you can always use the other love die and die cut it out of gold cardstock and use that as your sentiment. So now I'm going to finish up this card. I'm going to put glue on the back of the word love. I'm going to add it to the front of my card. And then I'm going to go in my stash and get a piece of twine. This twine has some gold accents within it, so it's really going to bring out the gold in that hot foil love. I'm going to tie that twine around this shape, tie it in a bow, because I think that this is really going to make it look like that candy box look with the bow on the front of it. So I'm just going to snip off the edges here, and then I'm going to add that entire piece to a piece of pattern paper. So I'm going to put glue on the back of this. I'm going to add it to the striped pattern paper. The pattern paper I cut down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then I'm going to add that to my white A2 size card base. So my card base is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. So that'll complete my first card using the Layered Chocolates stencil. For my next card, I'm going to be using the Layered Valentine Hearts stencil to make a card that looks like the Conversation Hearts candy that is popular for Valentine's Day. This stencil consists of 4 layers. One of those layers includes the words that go on the top of the candy hearts. You also have 2 layers that are the decoration. There are some dots as well as stripes, and then you have a layer for the shape of the hearts. This stencil is pretty versatile because you can use it with the hearts by itself, you can use it with just the hearts and the words, or you can use it with all 4 layers to include the hearts, the dots, the stripes, as well as the words. I'm going to use all 4 layers for my card today. I have a piece of cardstock that I cut to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I'm actually going to be sectioning off the different rows of hearts. I'm going to have each row a different color. So that top row I colored up in the Pink Flamingo ink from scrapbook.com. The second row here that you see is the pear ink. It's a light green ink. And then the next row will be a purple ink. And you can see that I'm just using some of the mint tape to section off the different rows because I want to make sure that when I ink up one specific row that I don't get that color ink on the row above or the row below the row that I'm working on. So you can see here with the purple row, I have a mask of tape above and below it because I want to confine all of my ink blending just to that one row. So I went ahead and removed the tape and moved it down. So now I'm going to cover up the purple hearts and cover up the row below the one that I'm working on. And now I'm going to use the sky blue ink, and all of my inks here today are from scrapbook.com. So after inking up that row in the sky blue ink, I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the next row. So I covered up the very bottom row of hearts as well as the row above the second to last row of hearts, and I'm going to go ahead and color that second to last row with the Lantern Light ink from scrapbook.com. That is a light yellow ink. And then I'll move on to the very last row of hearts, and here I'm just going to mask off the yellow row, which is right above the bottom row, and then I'll add the orange cream ink to the very last row. Of course, if you wanted to save time and just color all of the hearts in one color ink, you can do that. Or if you just wanted to do two color inks, you can do that as well. But I really like this colorful background of all of the different color hearts. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my next layer stencil. This is the layer B stencil that has the dots. And for this stencil, I'm using the same exact color inks that I used with the shape of the hearts. So I'm just going over the dots on that stencil with the same color ink as the ink that is underneath, and I'm just applying a little bit more ink so that the ink looks a little bit darker than the base color. And once I apply all of the ink to the dots on the stencil, I will remove that stencil and I will add my layer C, which is the stripes. And once again, I will use the same color ink, but just apply a little bit more ink so that it looks a little bit darker against the solid heart background. And I will do that for all of those rows of hearts. So if you wanted to, you can even stop here and just use the hearts with the stripes and the dots. But if you want to go with the fourth layer, the layer D stencil, you can add the words on top. And that's what I'm going to do now. So I'll go ahead and line up that layer D stencil, and I'm going to use the cardinal red ink, and I'm going to go over all of those words. So some of the words on this stencil are hugs, I love you, kiss, love, and then it will repeat all of those words for all of the remaining hearts on the stencil. So here's an up-close look at what that stenciled background looks like when all four layers of the stencil are used. It's so colorful. I just love all of these hearts on here with all of the different patterns, and I love how easy it is to make a beautiful stenciled background for a card using these pretty Pink Posh stencils. So next I'm going to work on the sentiment, and I am using the Hot Foil Large Hugs as well as the Large Hugs Shadow. If you don't have a hot foil machine, you can just use the Hot Foil Shadow and use your sentiment from there. I am going to use a piece of this rainbow hot foil, and I'm going to cut it down to where I want it. I want to try and get a lot of these different colors on here, so I'm going to bring my Hugs hot foil plate down a little bit and not start at the very top. So once I cut the foil out the size that I need, I'll set that aside while I get my hot foil system ready. And once the platform is heated up, that platform ready light will light up green. And that's when I'll put my hot foil plate with the flat side face down on the platform, and then I'll press the timer button. Once that timer button is solid green, I'll know that I'm ready to add my hot foil face down and then my cardstock. I'll go ahead and add my shim as well as the spacer pad to the top, and then I'll run that through my die cutting machine. And then I'll go ahead and remove that, and you can see all of that pretty hot foiling. And then I'll go ahead and take that shadow die and die cut the word from the cardstock. Next, I'm going to use a scallop water die from Pretty Pink Posh and die cut a piece of pattern paper. This is the same pattern paper that I used on the previous card, so I'm just using the leftovers here. I'll add it to the side of my stenciled background. and then I'm going to add the word hugs to the top of that card. I'm going to add a few of the Pretty Pink Posh Blue Sky Pearls. I'll add one at the top, and then I'll add a Pretty Pink Posh Lilac Pearl underneath that, and then I'll add one of the Blue Sky Pearls at the bottom. And then I'll add that entire layer to an A2 size card base. My card base measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then that's going to complete this card. For my next card, I will be using the Layered XOXO stencil. This is a 3-layer stencil, but you only use 2 of the layers at the same time. So you can see that you have a layer of O's, you have a layer of hearts, and there's a layer of X's. So you can use the X's and the hearts together, or you can use the X's and the O's together. So I have a piece of cardstock that I cut down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to layer my stencil with the X's. And I'll start with that stencil, and I'll be using the Distress Oxide Kitsch Flamingo ink, and I will cover up that entire stencil with that ink. After coloring all of those X's, decide if you want to use the hearts or the O's. I am going to use the hearts, so I go ahead and line that stencil up. And this time I'm going to ink that up with the Candied Apple Distress Oxide ink. So once I've added that ink all over the stencil, I'll remove the stencil and look how pretty that background is. I just love these stencils because you can really make a nice background for a card with them, and it's so quick and easy. So next I'm going to use this stamp set. This stamp set is called Heart Critters, and you can see there are 3 critters on there, and there are some sentiments, and the only stamp that I'm going to be using for my card today is this leopard. So I went ahead and stamped the images out onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I am using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens to do some watercoloring. I start out by adding the brown pen around the edges of the leopard, and then I come in with the orange followed by bright yellow. So those are the 3 colors that I'm using for the body of the leopard. Once I've applied all of those colors, I come in with my blender marker, which is what you see me coloring with right now. And I use the blender to color over top of those 3 colors to blend them out, and then I blend them towards the center. So you can see it goes from dark on the outside edge of the leopard, and then the very center is the lighter color. So again, these are water-based. If you don't have the blender marker, you can always use a paintbrush dipped in water, or you can use a water brush to get that blending effect. Just make sure you don't have too much water on the tip of your paintbrush or on your water brush, because you definitely don't want to saturate that cardstock. So if you need to get some of the water off of the brush, you can always use a paper towel. I do have a paper towel there now, and I am using my blender brush with the paper towel just to get some of the color off of it before I go to the next color. So here you can see me coloring up the nose, and I'm using the Cool Gray 6 for the nose as well as the blender. And then for the heart shape that the leopard is holding, I am using the Sugar Almond Pink, and I'm also going to use the blender just to make that pink color a little bit lighter towards the edge. And then for the bow on the center, I'm using my red marker, and then I'll use the blender just to lighten that up a little bit. I also stamped out the Potted Roses stamp set, and I'm going to show you how I do the coloring for one of the potted roses. So I'm using my deep red marker just to outline the lines that are on the rose, and then I'm coming in with the next lightest color, which is red, and just going over that, and then coming in with the blender just to blend those colors out towards the end of each one of those petals. And I'm going to do that for all 3 of those roses on this one flower pot. So here is the same thing. So taking the deep red, going over the edges of all of the rose, coming in with the red color, just going over the deep red with the red color, and then taking the blender and just blending that out towards the end of the petal. So I will do the coloring the same exact way for the potted rose, the single one on the left. I will be using the 2 potted roses for my card today. I will not be using the border at the top. So you can see now for the leaves, I'm coming in with light green and just going over that middle line on the leaf and then just expanding that color out towards the edges using my blender marker. And then for the flower pot, I'm using the Sugar Almond Pink and the blender just to have that a little bit lighter in the center. After I color all of those images, I will take a white gel pen and I will just add dots to the roses. I think this just adds for a little extra depth to all of these images. So you can see I'm just going around those petals, adding some dots, and then adding some dots to the leaves as well. Next, I'm going to use the Love Shaker die set. I'm only going to use the heart shape and not the word love that comes with the heart. You can see that the word love will go right in the middle of the heart, but I'm not going to use that love. I will be using a sentiment for my card, but not that particular one. So to put all these pieces together, I did die cut a scalloped border from the Pretty Pink Posh Scallop Border set out of white cardstock. I'm adding it there to the bottom of my stenciled background. I'm flipping my card panel over and just trimming off the excess. Remember, my card panel is cut to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. And then there at the bottom where that scallop border is, I'm going to add my stamped images. So I'm going to add 2 single flower pots, one on each side of my leopard. And then after I add those 3 images, I will add another flower pot with the 3 roses in that white space. Next, I'm going to add my heart shape to a piece of vellum. And then I'm going to use my scissors to cut around that vellum, just to cut off all of the excess around the heart. I'm going to use the hot foil large love and I'm going to add it to my platform once it's ready, and then I'll add a piece of red foil over the top and some smooth cardstock. I'll go ahead and add the shim as well as the spacer pad and then run that through my die cutting machine. And once it comes out, look how beautiful that red foiling is with the word love. I will use the love shadow and die cut that out of my cardstock. So I'll go ahead and run that through my die cutting machine. And remember, if you don't have a hot foil system, you can always use the large love shadow and die cut it out of red cardstock, or you can use the word love that comes with the heart shaker that I showed you earlier. So I added my heart to the top of my card, and when I added glue to the heart, I only added glue to the heart shape itself. I'm not putting any glue on the vellum because otherwise you'll be able to see through it. And notice that the vellum, it kind of makes the background a little bit softer. And that was my intention because I really wanted that large word love to stand out on top of that heart. So I'm going to go ahead and add that stenciled background with the stamped images to a piece of red cardstock that I cut to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then I'll add that to a white A2 size card base. And that's going to complete this card. So for my next card, I'll be using the Layered Cherries stencil. This is a 3-layer stencil. So you can see you have the cherries, the stems, and then you have the leaves for the cherries. So I have a piece of cardstock, and I'm going to go ahead and add my first layer, which is the shape of the cherries. I'm going to be using the dried marigold ink, and I'm taking a detailed blending brush and I'm just putting that dried marigold ink on the very bottom of those cherries. I wanted my cherries to have a golden color at the bottom, and then it will blend into red at the top. So next I'm going to use the Candied Apple Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to add the Candied Apple ink all over the white part of the cherries. so the candied apple ink will blend into the dried marigold. And again, I'm using a detailed blending brush because if I use a larger one, then I'm not going to be able to get only a little portion of that cherry colored in ink. I'll end up having to color the whole thing because of the large blending brush. So that's why I'm coming in here with a very fine detailed blending brush so I can only get a portion of the cherry, which is what my intention is to do. So after I add the candied apple ink, I'll come back in with the dried marigold and I will blend that color into the candied apple just for a smoother look. And I'll do that throughout the entire stencil. Once I've inked up all of my cherries, I will remove that stencil and then I will line up my next layer, which is the stems, and I will ink that up with the Distress Oxide Vintage Photo ink. This is a brown ink, and I'll just use a larger blending brush to get that brown color all over those stems. So here I don't need to worry about the detailed blending brush because the whole stencil is going to be the one color. Again, it's the Vintage Photo. When the stems are all colored, I will remove that stencil and then I'll add my last stencil, which is the leaves, and I'll ink up all of the leaves with the Mode Lawn Distress Oxide ink. To add some depth to the leaves, I'm going to take a detailed blending brush and I'm just going to come in off the center of each one of the leaves with the detailed blending brush and reapply some of this Mode Lawn ink and just make it a little bit darker. And again, that's just in the center of each one of those leaves. So it'll be darker in the center and then lighter on the end of those leaves. So I'll set that stencil aside and I'll work on my stamped images. Here's a look at the stamp set that I'll be using. It's called Sweet Cherries. It has 4 cherry stamps, some flowers, and some sentiments. I stamped out the Sweet Cherries stamp set, although I'm not going to be using all of these cherries. I'm only going to be using one of the double sets of cherries as well as some of the flowers. And I'm coloring these up with the same colors that I've used on my previous stamp. So I have the deep red, and the blender for the cherries. And then for the leaves, I'm going to be using the light green as well as the blender. I will add a white gel pen to add some accents to the cherries. And then I'm going to color the 2 flower images up with some yellows. I'm going to use the bright yellow in the center, followed by the yellow and then the blender to blend those colors out. And then I'll add the red to the center. And then I'll color the rest of the cherries off camera. I'm not going to be using the rest of those cherries on my card today, just the ones that you saw me color. So let's go ahead and start putting this card together. I have a scallop circle die that I die cut out of red cardstock and I'm adding it to a piece of vellum. I'm going to use my scissors just to cut the extra vellum off of the circle. And I'm going to stamp a sentiment inside that circle. So the sentiment I'm stamping out is "You're So Sweet," and it's from the Sweet Cherries stamp set. And I'm going to be using my Stays On Jet Black ink. You need to be careful with the ink that you stamp onto vellum because some inks will smear. And I do find that the Stays On ink, it does not smear on the vellum. So I go ahead and stamp that out. I'm going to use that for my card and I'm going to add the glue behind the cardstock only of that scalloped circle. I'm not adding glue behind the vellum because you will be able to see that through the vellum. And then I'm going to add one of the cherries at the bottom left-hand corner of that circle. And then I'm going to add a flower, the top right corner, and another flower on the cherries. I wanted to bring in some pink to this card, so I'm using the Strawberry Shortcake mix. You can see it in the bowl. That mix has some round clay confetti in white and pink. It also has some clay confetti strawberry pieces. Such a fun mix. And I'm just taking the pink ones out and adding them in the white areas of that stenciled background. So I've glued each one of those pink clay confetti round pieces to my card front. Then I added that card front to a red piece of cardstock that I cut down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. and then I added that to an A2 size card base, and that's going to complete this card. So once again, all supplies that I used today will be listed in the description box of this YouTube video, as well as on my blog at lisamearsdesigns.com. There will also be up close pictures of all of my cards on my blog post. You'll find that coordinating blog post in the description box as well. And I hope you liked my cards today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more card making inspiration. Thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.